Corner, presented by Jennifer. Mercy Thompson, Moon Called, Chapter 2. Mac the werewolf was sitting on the step by the office door when I drove up Monday morning. I kept my face impassive and showed none of the surprisingly fierce satisfaction I felt. Just handed him a heavy stack of fast food breakfast sandwiches so I could get my key out and open the door. I had been raised around wild animals. I knew how to tame them. A hearty welcome would send him off faster than harsh words if I judged him aright. But food was always a good lure. Eat, I told him as I set out for the bathroom to change into work clothes. Save me one, the rest are for you. All but one was gone when I came back. Thank you, he told me, watching my feet. You'll work it off. Come on, help me get the garage doors up. I led the way through the office and into the garage. There's nothing pending today, so we can work on my project bug. The beetle was unprepossessing at the moment. But when I was finished, it would be painted, polished, and purring like a kitten. Then I'd sell it for twice what I had put into it and find another car to resurrect. I made almost half my income refurbishing old VW classics. We worked a few hours in companionable silence when he asked to use the phone and make a long distance call. Long as it's not China, I said, coaxing a bolt held in place by 30-odd years of rust. I didn't sneak over to the office to listen in. I don't make a practice of eavesdropping on private conversations. I don't have to. I have very good hearing. Hello, he said. It's me. My hearing was not so good, however, that I could hear the person he was talking to. I'm fine, he said quickly. Look, I can't talk long. Pause. Better you don't know. Pause. I know. I saw a news report. I don't remember anything after we left the dance. I don't know what killed her or why it didn't kill me. No, I thought. No, look, it's better just now if you don't know where I am. Pause. I told you I don't know what happened, just that I didn't kill her. Pause. I don't know. I just want you to tell Mom and Dad I'm okay. I love them, and I'm looking for the ones who killed her. I have to go now. Pause. I love you too, Joe. There was a dozen stories that could have accounted for the half of his conversation that I heard. 2 dozen. But the most prevalent was the cautionary tales werewolves tell each other is what happens the first time a werewolf changes if he doesn't know what he is. In my head, I translated Mac's half of the conversation into a picture of a boy leaving a high school dance to make out with his girlfriend under the full moon, not knowing what he was. New werewolves, unless they have the guidance of a strong dominant, have little control of their wolves from the first time they change. Will form the first few times they change. If Mac were a new werewolf, it would explain why he didn't notice I was different from the humans around. You have to be taught how to use your senses. Here in the U.S., most werewolves are brought over by friends or family. There is a support structure to educate the new wolf, to keep him and everyone around him safe. But there are still occasional attacks by rogue werewolves. One of the duties of a pack is to kill those rogues and find their victims. Despite the stories, any person bitten by a werewolf doesn't turn into another werewolf. It takes an attack so vicious the victim lies near death to allow the magic of the wolf to slip past the body's immune system. Such attacks make the newspaper headlines like, "Man attacked by rabid dogs." Usually the victim dies of the wounds or of the change. If he survives, Then he recovers quickly, miraculously, until the next full moon, when he learns that he didn't really survive at all. Not as he had been. Usually a pack will find him before his first change and ease his way into a new way of life. The pack watches the news and reads the newspapers to prevent a new wolf from being alone, and to protect their secrets. Mac, maybe no one had found Mac. Maybe he'd killed his date, and when he returned to human shape, he refused to believe what he'd done, what he was. I'd been operating under the impression that he had left his pack, but if he was a new wolf, an untaught wolf, he was even more dangerous. I broke the rusted out bolt because I wasn't paying attention. When Mac returned from his phone call, I was working on removing the remnants with an easy out. The world's most misnamed tool. There is nothing easy about it. I hadn't planned on saying anything to him, but the words came out anyways. I might know some people who could help you. No one can help me, he replied tiredly. Then he smiled, which would have been more convincing if his eyes hadn't been so sad. I'm all right. I set down the easy out and looked at him. Yes, I think you will be, I said, hoping I wasn't making a mistake by not pushing. I'd have to let Adam know about him before the next full moon. Just remember, I've been known to believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. His mouth quirked up. Lewis Carroll. And they say the youth today aren't being educated. I said, if you trust me, you might find that my friends can help you more than you believe possible. The phone rang and I turned back to my work. Go into the phone, please, Mac, I told him. That late in the year, it was dark out when we finished at 6. He stood and watched me as I locked up, obviously thinking about something. I deliberately fumbled with the lock to give him more time, but he didn't take advantage of it. See you tomorrow, he said instead. All right. Then, impulsively, I said, do you have a place to sleep tonight? Sure, he said with a smile, then started off as if he had somewhere to be. I could have bitten off my tongue because I pushed him into a lie. Once he started lying to me, it would be harder to get him to trust me with the truth. I don't know why it works that way, but it does. At least in my experience. I kicked myself all the way home, but by the time I had fed Medea and made myself some dinner, I figured out a way around it. I'd take him a blanket tomorrow and unlock Stefan's VW bus, which was patiently awaiting brake parts from Oregon. I didn't think Stefan would mind Matt camping out for a night or two. I called Stefan to make sure, because it's unwise to surprise vampires. Sure, he said, without even asking who I wanted to let sleep in his van. That will be all right with me, sweetheart. How long until my bus is roadworthy again? For a vampire, Stefan was all right. Parts are supposed to be in day after tomorrow, I told him. I'll call you when they get here. If you want to help, we can get it done in a couple of long evenings. Otherwise, it'll take me a day. Right, he said, which was apparently a goodbye because the next thing I heard was a dial tone. Well, I told the cat, I guess I'm headed out to buy a blanket. It had to be a new blanket. Mine would smell like coyote, and a werewolf who hardly knew me wouldn't be comfortable surrounded by my scent. I spent several minutes looking for my purse before I realized that I left it locked in the safe at work. Happily, my garage was on the way to the store. Because it was dark, I parked my car on the street behind the garage, where there was a street light to discourage any enterprising vandals. I walked through the parking lot and past Stefan's bus, parked next to the office, and gave it an affectionate pat. Stefan's bus was painted to match the mystery machine, which said a lot about the vampire it belonged to. Stefan told me he briefly considered painting it black a few years ago when he started watching Buffy, but in the end, he decided the Vampire Slayer was no match for Scooby-Doo. I opened the office door, but didn't bother turning on the lights because I see pretty well in the dark. My purse was where I remembered leaving it. I took it out and relocked the safe. Out of habit, I double-checked the heat to make sure it was set low. Everything had been turned off and put away. All was as it should have been, and I felt the usual sense of satisfaction knowing it was mine. Well, mine in the banks. I smiled when I left the office and turned to lock the door behind me. I wasn't moving quietly on purpose, but having been raised by a pack of werewolves makes you learn to be quieter than most. Go away, Mac's voice came from the other side of Stefan's bus. He spoke in a low, growled tone. I hadn't heard from him before. I thought he was talking to me and spun towards the sound, but all I saw was Stefan's bus. Then someone else answered Mac. Not without you. The bus had darkened windows. I could see through them well enough to see the side door was open, framing the vague shadowy forms of Mac and one of his visitors. The second one I couldn't see. The wind was right, blowing gently past them to me. I smelled 2 other people besides Mac. Another werewolf and a human. I didn't recognize either one. Although I know most of Adam's wolves by scent, it wouldn't be odd if he had gotten a new wolf without my hearing about it. But it was the human that told me something was up. I'd never known Adam to send a human out with one of his wolves on business. Stranger yet was that no one showed any sign that they knew I was around. I was quiet, but even so, both werewolves should have heard me. But neither Mac nor the other wolf appeared to notice. No, Mac said while I hesitated. No more cages. No more drugs. They weren't helping. Cages? I thought. Someone had been keeping Mac in a cage? There was no need for that, not with Adam around. Though some alphas had to depend on bars to control new wolves, Adam wasn't one of them. Nor did Mac's comments about drugs make sense. There are no drugs that work on werewolves. They were, kid. You just need to give them a chance. I promise you, we can help undo your curse. Undo his curse? There was no drug in the world that would undo the change, and a darn few werewolves who considered their state a curse after the first few months. Eventually, most of them felt becoming short-tempered and occasionally furry was a small price to pay for extraordinary strength, speed, and senses. Not to mention the fringe benefits of a body immune to disease and old age. Even if the werewolf belonged to Adam, I doubted he knew that one of his pack was telling wild stories. At least I hoped he didn't know. Max seemed to know these two, though, and I was beginning to feel that his story was more complicated than I had thought. You talk like you have a choice, the third man was saying, but the only choice you have is how you get there. These weren't Adam's men, I decided. The mention of curses, cages, and drugs made them the enemy. If Mac didn't want to go with them, I wouldn't let them take him. I took a quick glance around, and the streets were empty. After 6, the warehouse district was pretty dead. I stripped out of my clothes as quietly as I could and shifted into coyote form. As a human, I didn't stand a chance against a werewolf. The coyote was still not a match, but I was fast. Much faster than a real coyote and just a hair quicker than a werewolf. I jumped onto the railing and vaulted from there to the top of Stefan's bus for the advantage of the higher position, though I was giving up surprise. No matter how quietly I moved, a werewolf would hear the click of my nails on the metal roof. I readied myself for launch, but paused. From atop the bus, I could see Mac and the 2 men. None of them seemed to be aware of me. Mac had his back to me, but all the others would have to do was look up. They didn't. Something wasn't right. Behind the 2 strangers was a big black SUV, the kind of car you would expect bad guys to drive. I don't believe there's any way to undo what you did to me, Mac was saying. You can't give me back my life or give Meg back hers. All you can do is leave me alone. The human's hair was in a crew cut, but it was the big black gun I could see peeking out of his shoulder holster that first made me think military. Both of the strangers stood like military men. Adam had that posture too. The shoulders were just a little stiff, their backs a little too straight. Maybe they did belong to Adam. The thought made me hesitate. If I hurt one of Adam's wolves, there would be heck to pay. The moon's coming, said the long-haired man, the werewolf. Can't you feel it? How are you planning to survive the winter, kid? It was short hair again. His voice was kindly, fatherly. Patronizing even. It gets cold around December, even in this desert. I stifled a growl as I tried to determine the best way to help Mac. I'm working here, Max said with a gesture at the garage. If it gets colder, I think she'll let me sleep in the garage until I find somewhere to live if I ask her. Ask her? The short hair looked sympathetic. She kept you here for us. She's one of us, kid. How else do you think we found you? Max smelled of shock first, then defeat. Emotions have a smell, but only in my coyote form is my nose good enough to distinguish more than the strongest feelings. My lips curled back over my teeth. I don't like liars, especially when they are lying about me. The werewolf's voice was dreamy. When the moon comes, you can't stop the change. He swayed back and forth. Then you can run and drink the fear of your prey before they die beneath your fangs. Moonstruck, I thought, shocked out of my anger. If this wolf was so new that he was moonstruck, he certainly wasn't Adams. And whoever sent him was out an idiot. I'm not coming, Max said, taking a step away from them. He took another step back, putting his back against the bus. He stiffened, drew in a deep breath, and looked around. Mercy? But neither of the men paid attention when Matt caught my scent. The werewolf was still held in his moon dreams, and the human was drawing his gun. We're tired of doing this the easy way, he said. I could smell his pleasure. He might have tried the easy way first, but he liked the hard way better. His gun was the kind you would find in military catalogs for wannabe mercenaries, where what it looks like is the least important, is at least as important as how well it performs. Get in the car, kid. I'm packing silver bullets. If I shoot you, you'll be dead. He sounded like a thug from a 50s gangster movie. I wonder if it wasn't deliberate. If I get in the car, I'll be dead anyway, won't I? Max said slowly. Did you kill the other two who were in the cages by me? Is that why they disappeared? None of them had noticed the werewolf was starting to change. Not even the werewolf himself. I could see his eyes gleaming brightly in the darkness and the smell of the musk of wolf and the magic. He growled. Quiet, snapped the human. Then he looked. He paused, swallowed, and turned his gun ever so slightly towards his erstwhile partner. As a human, the werewolf probably weighed about 200 pounds. Werewolves fully changed weighed upwards of 250 pounds. No, I don't know where the extra weight comes from. It's magic, not science. I'm a little large for the average coyote, but that meant the werewolf was still 5 times my weight. I've been trying to figure out a way to turn my speed into an advantage, but when the werewolf, his elongated jaws stretching around, sharp white fangs focused on Mac and growled again, I knew I just ran out of time. I threw myself off the top of the car and onto the werewolf, who was still slowed by his ongoing change. I snapped at him to get his attention and caught his throat, still barren of the thick ruff designed to protect him from such an attack. I felt my eye teeth snag flesh, and blood squirted, pushed by his heart and the increased blood pressure that accompanies the change. It wasn't a mortal wound. Werewolves heal too fast. But it should slow him down, giving me a head start while he bound the wound. Only he didn't stop. He was hot on my heels as I dashed past Stefan's bus, across the alley that allowed access to my garage base, and leapt over the chain-link fence surrounding the Save You More self-storage facility. If he had been in full wolf form, he'd have cleared the fence easier than I did, but he was hampered by his awkward shape and had to stop and tear through the fence instead. Spurred by hunting rage, he was faster than I was, even on two legs. He shouldn't have been. I'd outrun my share of werewolves, and I knew I was faster than they were. But no one had told him that. He was catching up to me. I jumped back over the fence because it had slowed him down the first time. If there had been homes nearby, the impatient, frustrating whines of the werewolf made as it was forced to stop and rip the chain-link fence apart, would have had the police on their way. But the nearest residence was blocks away. The thought reminded me that I needed to worry about innocent bystanders as well as Mac and myself. I reversed direction, running down the road back towards the garage, intent on leading the werewolf away from town rather than into it. But before I reached the garage, my pursuer tripped and fell to the street. I thought at first the change had taken him completely, but no werewolf rose on all fours to continue the chase. I slowed, then stopped where I was and listened, but all I could hear was my heart pounding with fear. He was almost finished with the change, his face entirely wolf though his fur had not yet begun to cover him. His hands, lying limply on the blacktop, were distorted, too thin, with an inhuman distance between his fingers and his thumb. His nails were thickened and had begun to come to a point at the tip. But he wasn't moving. Shaking with the need to run, I forced myself to approach him. I waited for him to jump up and grab me the way they always do in the late-night movies. But he just lay there, smelling of blood and adrenaline. A trail of liquid stretched out behind him as if he were a car that had blown a radiator hose and slung antifreeze all over the road. But the liquid glistening on the street under the street lamp was blood. Only then did it occur to me that I did not hear the thump of his heart or the whisper of his breath. I heard a car start up and took my eyes off the werewolf in time to see the black SUV squeal out of the parking lot and turn towards me. The big car wobbled as the driver fought his speed and his turn, his headlights blinding me momentarily, but I had already seen my escape route and took it blind. He slowed a minute as if he considered stopping by the body on the street, but then the VA roared and the SUV picked up speed. He narrowly avoided hitting the lamppost I dodged behind. I couldn't tell if Mac was in the car or not. I watched the SUV's taillights until it turned on the highway and blended with the traffic there. I walked to the werewolf just to be certain, but he was well and truly dead. I never killed anyone before. He shouldn't have been dead. Werewolves are hard to kill. If he had bothered to staunch the wound, or if he hadn't chased me, the wound would have healed before he could bleed out. The taste of his blood in my mouth made me ill, and I vomited beside the body until the taste of bile overwhelmed anything else. Then I left him lying in the middle of the road and ran back to the garage. I needed to check on Mac before I took on the task of dealing with the dead werewolf. To my relief, Mac was leaning on Stefan's bus when I loped into the parking lot. He held a gun loosely in his hand and the barrel bent. "Mercy?" he asked me when I approached, as if he expected me to talk. I ducked my head once, then darted around the front of the garage where I had left my clothes. He followed me, but when I shifted back, he saw that I was naked. He turned his back to let me dress. I pulled my clothes on quickly. It was cold out. "I'm decent," I told him, and he faced me again. You have blood on your chin, he said in a small voice. I wiped it off with the bottom of my t-shirt. I wasn't going shopping tonight, so it didn't matter that I got blood on my clothes. Don't throw up again, I told myself sternly. Pretend it was a rabbit. It hadn't tasted like a rabbit. What are you? He asked. Are you one of theirs? Where is the wolf? He's dead. We need to talk, I told him, then paused as I collected my scattered thoughts. But first we need to get the dead werewolf out of the street. And before that, I guess we should call Adam. I led him back to the office, this time turning on the light. Not that either of us needed it for anything other than comfort. He put his hand on top of mine when I reached for the phone. Who's Adam? And why are you calling him? He asked. I didn't fight his hold. The local alpha. We need to get the body out of the road. Unless you want both of us to disappear into some federal laboratory for science to pick over for a few years before they decide they can learn more from us dead than alive. Alpha? He asked. What's that? He was no. Werewolves live in packs, I told him. Each pack has an alpha, a wolf strong enough to keep the others under control. Adam Humperton is the local alpha. What does he look like? He asked. 5'10", 180 pounds, dark hair, dark eyes. I don't think he has anything to do with your wolves, I said. If Adam wanted you, he'd have you, and he'd have found you a lot sooner. He can be a jerk, but competence is his forte. Max stared at me, his brown eyes looking yellowish in the fluorescent lights of my office. Truth to tell, I was surprised he was still in human form, because watching one wolf change tends to encourage others. I met his gaze calmly, then dropped my eyes until I was looking at his shoulder instead. All right, he said, slowly removing his hand. You saved me tonight, and that thing could have torn you apart. I've seen them kill. I didn't ask when or whom. It was important to take action in the right order to avoid worse trouble. Call Adam, remove the body from the middle of the street where anyone could see it, then talk. I punched in Adam's number from memory. Humperman, he answered, with just a touch of impatience on the fourth ring. I've killed a werewolf at my garage, I said, then hung up. To Mac's raised eyebrow, I said, that'll get a faster result than 20 minutes explaining. Come on, you and I need to get the body off the street before someone spots it. When the phone rang, my answering machine picked it up. I took Stefan's bus because loading something large into the bus is a lot easier than loading it into my little rabbit.